the premise behind this study really bases on the fact that you guys have GPS auto steer. More often now, guys are spraying at strange hours that they never used to do, simply because they can, and maybe because they want to avoid the wind. Whatever your reasons are, we wanted to take a good look and evaluate the time of day of spraying, essentially, to find out if there's big differences in efficacy. There could be some beneficial things that happen at night. There could be some bad things that happen at night. So we worked, and I'd have to give a lot of praise and credence and thanks to Bob Blackshaw, because, you know, basically he volunteered his time and expertise to help us develop the protocols and the ideas behind it. You know that last year we focused it on as a module at the field school, and Bob led that project or led that day with a farmer named Don Bowles, who had phoned him up a few years back that was saying he was interested in spraying at night, and he's been doing it for quite some time and is quite interested on it. You know, there's a lot of different things that could potentially happen. What do you think? What do you think? Why would we care time of day on spraying different herbicides? Do you guys have any ideas?
Efficacy?
You think there's a potential in differences of efficacy? Why?
Beneficial insects.
We're spraying herbicides.
Plant uptake. Temperature.
Sorry, what was that one?
Plant uptake.
Plant uptake. What would be different?
It could be slower.
Slower.
It could be slower uptake or last longer on the leaves, or.
So there could be differences in uptake, based on what?
The stomata might be open more than they would be in the heat of the day.
So we're talking about changes in plant physiology. You could jump in on this one at any time, because
these are all good ideas.
I'm definitely not a plant physiologist, but certainly, you know, the stomata mentioned was, you know, what's that based on? Probably things like temperature, relative humidity. There's probably some real significant environmental conditions. Actually, that's a nice segue on our handout if you have it. First page is our treatment list, and this is just the pre-seed burn down trial. We've done this at 2 different spray dates. The treatments are there. Wrecking the flow here anyways, but we left glyphosate on its own. We reduced the rates, but we also did all of these other, a few different mixes, like fluoroazolam and pre-pass. What's the name of the herbicide in heat again, Bob? Maybe it's right here.
Saflufenicil.
Yeah, saflufenicil. And we've got carfentrazone, which is the component of AIM, and that's in Clean Start. We decided to spray that component separate from the glyphosate. And the reason is if we didn't, then how would we know what the difference is, whether it was the glyphosate or whether it was the additive? So we'll take a look at the plot. In fact, I'm standing in the plot where we've only sprayed the fluoroazolam component of pre-pass. And what I was getting to on page 2, we talked about weather. So this is kind of hard to see in black and white, but the first graph is the weather conditions at the time of spraying for this trial here, and it was sprayed May 7th. Everything was sprayed within a 17-hour window, we'll say. So we have 3 treatments that we sprayed at. Early in the morning, yeah, I'm excited about this trial I meant to mention, but the rest of the crew wasn't so excited because we actually had to come and spray in between 4 and 5 in the morning, and then our night spraying we did between midnight and 1, and then we also did a daytime, which is between 12 noon and 1 o'clock. And these little gray bars represent those timings, and you can actually look where those bars intersect the graph as far as temperature. So the May 7th on the top there, at noon, the top, where it intersects the top, the temperature was about 12 degrees. And the wind is that other ziggly one. So wind generally was quite low, between 7 and 10 kilometers an hour throughout all 3 spray treatments. So it actually moves to May 11th because that's that midnight to 1 p.m. The temperature you can see had gone up and spiked back down, but still pretty warm at around 10 degrees. Whereas our early morning spray, that's at 4 to 5 in the morning, the temperature's down towards 5 degrees Celsius. So we've seen that there's a big difference in temperatures. I don't have it with me, but there's probably differences in relative humidity. The wind in this situation didn't really change much. The second spray date is the bottom chart, and that's actually the same trial. We just did it over again on a different date. And the reason we did that was really to get different environmental conditions, different weather conditions. So in that case, the temperatures were much higher. But again, that early morning one, it takes until early morning for that temperature to reach its lowest point in the day, it seems. Will that affect herbicide uptake? What are you guys' guess?
Probably won't see much difference.
Okay, that's exactly what I would have guessed too. Herbicides are actually registered at a rate high enough to work under most environmental conditions. I mentioned in this case, we reduced it to 3/4 rate, and that 3/4 rate was a half-liter equivalent of glyphosate rate. So already we're at a low pre-seed burn down rate. You can see we've got amazing weeds here. This is our little beautiful weed garden. Anyone think there's an effect? And what is it? And even take a guess, if you think there's a difference, which one you think is going to be better?
So at 5 in the morning, what would your dew have been like?
Good question. We've recorded that. Don't have the information with me at this point. But how would that affect things?
You're gonna have runoff on your I don't know how many gallons of spray you put down.
We spray at
10 gallons.
40 liters an acre, 10 gallons, yeah. So the dew issue is something that might affect things, right?
So the length of time that the surface is wet may have some interaction, you know, if it's a surfactant that's cutting a leaf cuticle, if it's going through the leaf cuticle, probably not going through stomata, but leaf cuticle, then the length of time it's wet would have some interaction.
Great point. Glad we brought Rob. What we're talking about is essentially how long does it take the moisture on the leaf to dry out, because the herbicide uptake really only happens when it's in solution, right? If that leaf dries up completely, you can actually sometimes see it. The herbicide will crystallize out on the leaf. Once it's at that crystalline point, there's very little chance of it uptake. So there's actually a potential benefit to dew, I think. As long as it's not to a point where it's literally washing off the leaf, the longer time that you have a leaf wetness, really, to me, says there's a better chance of uptake at that point. Does that make sense? If I say anything wrong, you should jump in, eh? Anything else along that line that might affect this?
Does it matter how warm the temperatures get during the day after it's been applied?
I would think so.
Does that negate the low temperature effect while you're applying?
How about I'll ask a question at the same time. What do you think and this is to Bob too, what do you think a low temperature at the time of spraying would do? Does anyone have any guesses? Bob's beating this message into everybody. When's the best time for herbicide uptake? Yeah, when the plants are most actively growing. So my guess, and we'll actually see this, is at the lowest temperatures, the plants are pretty not growing as much as they would be when it's hotter. Pretty straightforward, eh? The follow-up temperature, I think, is important because it makes the plant grow faster. However, the uptake the uptake portion is already done. Because if the leaf's dry and it warms up afterwards, I don't know that there's any more uptake. However, the plant starts to grow faster and then the chemicals get through the plant and probably kill better. Anything to add to that?
Oh, that's basically right.
I like the word basically. Yeah.
You know, we don't, a lot of what we're talking about is a little bit theoretical.
Yeah.
And actually, that's why, you know, if you were at the field diagnostics school last summer, it was great because we just had a conversation. And, you know, lots of times I have data to back up what I talk about. Last year I didn't have any data to back up what I talked about. Really. So this is why we're sort of doing this work. But, you know, the first thing in making it work is getting the herbicide into the plant. And so generally sort of like high humidity and sort of cooler conditions are good because that slows down droplet drying time. So as long as the longer it's in solution, then the more time there is for the plant to perform. And the cuticle, which is the main barrier for the herbicide to get into the plant, it's hydrated when we have dew and then we have high humidity and then the temperature is lack of sun or lower temperature means that drop doesn't dry. So we'll get more into the plant, theoretically, under those conditions. And once it's in the plant, then it has to do its job, and that's a whole nother story. Or maybe we know less about that. But the plant has to be actively growing to sort of move the herbicide in the plant, translocate it from the leaf off to the growing point of the plant to make it work. And then in terms of metabolism, so what we haven't talked about is this is burn down, but in crop, in terms of crop tolerance, if it's very cold, the crop isn't growing as well, which means it's not metabolizing the herbicide as well. So you actually have more potential for crop immunity if you have sort of more uptake or less degradation, then you can get or maybe even more. So sort of what you might get better weed control, but you might get
So Bob, the question is, there's two things that go on in a plant. During the day with photosynthesis, this is transpiration. In the overnight hours, in the lack of sunlight, we don't photosynthesize, but we respire. So respiration occurs at night. Does transpiration and respiration have the same effect in herbicide uptake, or are they metabolically different?
They're actually quite different because transpiration is just movement of water in the xylem.
Yeah.
And most herbicides, there's a little bit, if you have a soil-applied herbicide, some of that herbicide will move in the xylem from the roots up until the shoots. But all other translocation herbicides in the plant is at the phloem, which is where the sugars and carbohydrates are moving, and that's all due to photosynthesis. And so evaporation and transpiration is not happening. So it's more about photosynthesis of the plant growing and producing sugars, and then they're moving into the plant. The herbicides just go along for the ride. You've heard me say that 1,000 times. Herbicides just go along for the ride where it's photosynthesis. So if the plant isn't growing, then there's no photosynthesis and there's no movement of sugars. And so this is what I talk about in terms of a frost as well. That the plants are in shock and there's nothing sort of happening in the plants. You have to sort of wait until so this is about getting more into the plant. I think there's some big advantages, but the whole other story then is, what are the temperatures do then to, I guess, to make things out of that. If it stays really cold during all of the time, then, potentially there's less activity. But I don't think the herbicide's going to really break down that, I don't think would break down that much from the night until 11 o'clock today when we have sun temperature in wheat species. So I don't think that would be a big difference, but we don't know. And I think our results could be quite different with our in-crop applications in June versus application in May. Because the temperature, humidity, moisture, all the stuff. We're talking about some of the negatives. We're talking about a quick drop of drying time and low humidity and high temperatures and all that stuff. Well, maybe we never have that. And so I guess the flip side of our conversation last year is some of these things will not necessarily be better, but maybe lots of times they're just going to be equal, and it's another opportunity to spray. And that's actually where the conversation started out a year ago. If you were afraid to do this and thought you could never do this, well, maybe it's worth thinking about.
So that's the theory. Any questions that's on your head right now before we move on?
What about spraying in the wind, a little bit of wind versus dead calm?
You're talking about the risk of inversion, or just asking that question?
With a little bit of wind getting chemical underneath the leaves rather than just on top, getting better efficacy.
I don't think it's going to happen. You're not going to get underneath. But spraying in a little bit of wind is actually better than dead calm. So anything less than 5 miles an hour is probably better than 0. But that's just more of a coverage, a total coverage, and getting movement down, and not having it sort of drift off somewhere. So that's a good thing. But it's still almost all of it going to be on the upper surface of the plant.
Glad you brought it up, though. I mean, that is one of the concerns with spraying at night, is that risk of inversion. And I'm sure you guys have heard inversion. Anybody not know what inversion is? Good. So My personal opinion is I think we have a much lower risk in this pre-seed application of inversion simply because we're cooler in the spring. Haven't necessarily, and the spring is windier, so we don't have those really dead calm days. So it'd be interesting to see if there is a difference. We should pick them up potentially pretty well on our small plots if there's any movement at all. But we were keeping that in mind. So, any other questions? Yeah, so the question was, does UV have any effect? And there are certain chemicals that actually do photodegrade. So that all that means is that the UV sunlight, the rays actually break down the chemical, and there are some potential groups that may perform better with a night application based on that. I'm not really an expert on which ones do photodegrade.
Post would be one of the number one examples for that. So,
Yeah.
so it's very sensitive to be broken down in UV light. So what they've done is they came along with a great adjuvant like merge that gets it into the plant very quickly. And so a lot of herbicides, they get into the plant in the first half hour or 2 hours. And you know that from sort of the rain fastness that's on the label. So that's saying the rain is get a rain an hour after spraying and you're still good to go. That means that you have 80 or 90% of the herbicide in the morning by that time. That's what it's telling you. But Post is one of the ones that first came out and they just used Agrel 90 and Ag Surf as the adjuvant. And there's a lot of proteins for it. So that's why I'm actually a new adjuvant like merge, which is so much better for the So that is a disadvantage of spraying in the middle. If you spray in the middle of the day, you have this potential UV degradation, and you just have very rapid drop of drying if you're spraying in the heat of the day at 2, 3, 4 Generally speaking, it's not the best time to spray.
Would most Group 1s be like that? Like the Post?
Yeah, it is a tendency with a lot of group ones.
And then fungicide, Ken, would that be better in the evening or at night?
It is, but Treflan and Edge are like that too. But that's why they're so applied. That's why it's incorporated.
So Ryan had a question about fungicides, and actually I'm quite interested in that as well. So far, all we're attacking is the herbicide end of things. I do believe, and I have personally seen some very significant differences in fungicide efficacy. You know, where a guy ran out or got late at night and then started back up in the morning, and you could see clear lines of differences in control. So I do think that I'd like to take a look at fungicides down the road, but so far we're only looking at herbicides.
The difference in control you saw was better at night, like better control.
On the fungicide, I can't remember, to be honest with you. Yeah. On that note, what are your guys' guesses on when's the best efficacy for herbicide application? We're calling it early morning, day, and night. So you said no difference. Anyone think there's any differences? Have you seen differences yourselves?
They work better at night, especially group 1s.
Any other guesses?
I'd say best at 4 to 5 in the morning.
Okay, we won't hold it against you if you're wrong. It's okay. No one else has a guess?
8 o'clock.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you. Let's talk results now. And so far we are preliminary. We're only one location, 2 trials, 2 different weather. The early morning overall, the early morning application was by far the worst, and that was not what I expected. And what is it that everyone does?
For years.
Early morning. For wind. It's for wind,
It's for wind. It's for another purpose. In these trials, I've seen up to even a 20% difference, and I'll let you guys look yourselves and see it. So, what even right here, fluorozolam doesn't have activity on some of these grassy weeds, but you can see very clearly on the stinkweed. I just picked three plants from the different spray treatments. So this first one is the middle of the day. You can see kind of the amount of yellowing. This one is the night. This one's the early morning. I was absolutely shocked by this, to be honest with you. So that's why I was kind of excited to have the opportunity to show some of it to you. Very clear in the Roundup treatments alone as well. That early morning spray. Now, guess what? I'm one of the world's biggest skeptics. I'm going to take this with a grain of salt myself, and I'll expect you to as well, because we don't have a lot of information on this. But, you know, if this ends up being the case, you know, over multiple sites in multiple years, there's a potential I would rethink getting up at 4 in the morning. Like, I think that's awesome personally, but
What time of the night was your nighttime spraying?
the night time's between midnight and 1 p.m.
What
or
was
1
the
a.m.
The overnight
Yeah.
temperature, Ken?
So the overnight temperature, I think on the first one was 5 degrees. Yeah, on this first spray date. So,
So by
anyways,
morning,
it
it might have been so cold. Like our coldest time period is in that 4, 5, 6 in the morning.
Exactly.
It was just too cold. To,
yeah, I don't think dew was an issue at all. I think that we were pretty dry at that time of year, but or that time that we sprayed it. I'm going to make sure, you know, like I'm going to double check everything we're doing, because I'm seeing more of a result than I ever expected. So the other thing, you know, fluoroazolam, I could pick it out and is pretty consistent over all of the replicates. We also have a second trial that I've seen it pretty consistent, but at the same time, you know, the subjectivity in a visual rating, we're also taking weed biomass. So I haven't had a chance to actually analyze it. You can see actually here there's a little square missing here. We would do 4 quarter-meter drops for each plot, and then we'll do a fresh and a dry weight. So at least we'll also have some quantitative data. What I'm speaking to you right now has been my own visual ratings. So we can actually take a walk and look at some of the other treatments, and if you have questions along the way, certainly ask. So this is our weedy check here, and when I'm doing these ratings, you have to really be quite analytical. You kind of take a picture in your head. This is a split plot trial design, which allows us to take those ratings within a small area. I think that was definitely a good choice, because it helps in weed uniformity issues and stuff. Right now I'm in a check. You can see we've got great big flicks weed, we've got henbit, we've got downy brome, we've got stinkweed, dandelions, thistles, pretty much all the weeds you want to get excited about in the morning. We've got buckwheat, stork's bill. So this is completely unsprayed.
Hey, Ken,
Yeah.
how come the weed control rating is so low in general, like 30%? And is it because you have so many weeds?
Okay,
or?
so I mentioned we separated the components out that are in some of those pre-seed blends.
Okay.
You know, like pre-pass is Roundup and fluoroazolam, clean start is Roundup and carfentrazone. We only sprayed the carfentrazone and the fluoroazolam component by itself, so that we might be able to learn a little bit on the different groups of herbicides.
Yeah.
We didn't want to put it all together with Roundup, because we might only see the Roundup effect.
Even your Advantage Plus Max on the bottom chart is poor weed control.
On the bottom chart, those ratings are low because it's only about a week after application.
Oh,
Roundup actually takes a good solid 2 weeks to really get a full rating. So the next set of ratings, I'm sure those will be improved. But also look at the amount of weeds we have here.
yeah.
This is not a simple test to a half-liter equivalent of Roundup. On that point, this was only a 3/4 liter rate.
Oh, yeah.
We did go up to, no, sorry, this is 3/4 of a half-liter rate,
Oh, yeah.
which is not a lot of Roundup for these types of weeds.
Right.
And we haven't gotten to it, but that's it right there. You can see it. These ones still did an awesome job. We waited 2 weeks to spray. I decided to go to the full half-liter rate because the weeds had grown that much more, but we still wanted a low rate so we'd be able to pick out differences. The reason that all these other ratings are low is because would you expect a part rate of fluoroazolam or a part rate of carfentrazone really to get you really effective control on all the weeds? No. What I did notice is that in rating those contact ones like heat and carfentrazone, the AIM, you need to rate those actually quite soon after application. And they did actually a good job on certain weeds, but you don't expect them to kill a lot of things. One thing that really I was able to pick out was like heat and carfentrazone. They did an awesome job on flicksweed for some odd reason, which is a winter annual. It's quite big. Maybe there's lots of surface area, but you can even see right here we're in the heat. If you want it, you guys can come take a look. You can look at some of the damage that happened, but really in those types of mixes, the Roundup is doing the bulk of the work. the additives are only sort of helping out with certain tough weeds. It's a contact herbicide, and you can see some of that pattern damage. So in these cases, like heat on its own, I don't feel confident that I really noticed a huge difference, but I think the day was better. So let's take a look down at the Roundup now. This is one that's a little tough to see in this one, so we'll go take a look at the next trial where we haven't taken out all of the quarter-meter squares and trampled them. So our first plot here is night. This is the day treatment. And this is the early. So I can see here still that the early treatment is not as good as either the day or the night. A lot more green in the leaf. Again, we'll take you to look at some other trials. Overall, still pretty impressive kill on this type of weed set for 3/4 of a half liter.
And the night this was all done like it would be the night before and then the early and then the day of like the same
Yeah.
day.
Everything was sprayed within a 17-hour period. Yeah.
Will you switch the order next time then?
No, it's always the same order. We actually do the day, night, early morning.
You won't go early morning, then night, the day.
No, because we kind of want to get a day where we can pick a day where it's not like 80 kilometers an hour wind, and we use that judgment that it's still a good time to spray.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And some of them, like here we're into the carfentrazone here. The effect of carfentrazone, this was sprayed over 2 weeks ago. It's really hard to see, but if you do come in, you could probably find some dead skeleton of the flicksweed. Hard to pick up big differences. I think we just had too much weed pressure for that small amount of a chemical, to be honest with you.
So the trial again was day versus night again for this one, or what was this trial?
Still the same thing. Now we're looking at the aim component of
No, the heat was.
Clean Start.
This was your first or second now?
This was the first one here.
Yeah.
Now we're going to move into the second.
Yeah.
Until you're down at about
3/4 of a half liter rate, yeah. So at this point now we're actually moving into a second trial. So this one would have been sprayed on May 16th. We upped the rates to a full half liter, which is really quite low for this type of weed set. But now this was only sprayed less than 10 days ago or so, 10 to 11 days ago. So Clean Start in the day, you can see some of these effects that it has on a stinkweed. Basically killed the tops a little bit, but not really enough to kill the plant. So we're trying to do some subjective rating on it, but tough to pick out big differences on the time of day. But I mean, here's an example. The Clean Start on the carfentrazone on its own actually did a great job on flicksweed, which can often be a tough weed to kill with glyphosate.
One water pump?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
was there a what kind of spray pattern? Like coarse or fine?
Medium. Yeah,
Medium
we use
spray?
turbo tees.
Turbo.
Yeah. So this is our our checked strip right there. Again, we're into heat at this point. Probably too many weeds to give it a good evaluation on its own.
Well, you're just going to have to key in on specific weed species.
Absolutely,
Kim.
yeah.
I mean, you just obviously you ignore all the grasses, and then you say, okay, I can really only get a good rating on maybe flicksweed and maybe henbit,
Yeah.
and you just ignore everything else.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we sort of thought there could be a difference between systemic herbicides and contact herbicides. So that's why we deliberately went with something like AIM and heat, which are strictly, maybe they aren't strictly contact, but they're primarily contact. But there is a little bit of movement of heat in the plant, so, but it's not anything like the glyphosate or something. So that's why we sort of split them up. I guess I sort of suspect that there potentially could be less of a difference with the contact size than there would be with systemic herbicide. That's maybe not. But again, I'd say the results could be quite different when we spray in crop.
Yeah. So far what I've seen is that the midday is the best. And here's another trial with just the glyphosate on its own. And this wasn't that long ago, so you can actually see the effects. This one here is the day or early treatment. You can see, you know, basically you'll pick one weed sort of the same size and then compare it to the next one. But even if you look at the overall plot in this case, you know, you can play the researcher, take a picture of that. Take a picture of that. This is the night spray. Pretty similar. But look at the day here. This one's very clear, I think.
Interesting.
I'm sleeping now, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah, but makes you weed all sleep.
Yeah, you can see it, eh? Yeah.
I'm always going to have the attitude it's more temperature than anything, rather than time and pace.
Whatever the reasons are, it could be, yeah.
It'd be interesting to see the
Spray
same
1 quarter a day
you got
from
15 to 3 nights.
5 and 8 and
Yeah.
7.
Your early in the morning might
After that,
actually
you
be a
get
better
better
treatment in a month from now. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's why we have we have a separate trial for that. We have an in-crop trial. Yeah.
Are you spraying your in-crops right now?
You know, you get that heavier dew. I'm not saying that there was a heavy dew, but so the dilution will come up. You've gone from 45 liters per acre volume to 200 liters per acre volume in terms of how that surfactant interacts with the. I've always wondered about that. If that's driving some of that.
So the whole sort of do thing is, you know, I guess you heard me say this before, but I say there's never too much. So, you have a range, and that's a totally different story. You can sort of look at the plant yourself. What has to happen is the leaf has to be so wet that you spray, and then those little tiny spray droplets, they coalesce into larger droplets.
And it's not runoff, it's diluting a surfactant.
Well, you're talking about diluting, but I don't think that's, that just hydrates the cuticle and all that stuff. That just helps. Is the surfactant is a little less effective? I think it's sort of mitigated or it's overcome by this stuff. Hydrating cuticle and all that stuff. So I think dew is, you know, generally.
That midnight, like for this time of the crop year for in-crop spraying, that temperature inversion that you might see by midnight to 1, is it kind of not a problem anymore?
Well, I think to get a temperature inversion, you have to have a hot day.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I just don't think we'll get it this time of the year.
You see it?
Because
Like even right now, like for our in-crop spraying.
It's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
the obvious time
Good one. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me.
No.
when I see a temperature
Yeah.
No, you're crazy.
Oh.
The fungicide though, it's different.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
But do you want the fungicide to go in the cuticle, or is it just contact? Is it just killing the contact?
No, there's systemic.
Okay.
There's a systemic effect.
I guess it depends.
Some that are like barrier fungicides.
it's very visual. You have so much dust in the air when harvesting. And that's what an inversion is. If you're not really sure if you've ever seen it, that's you see the harvesting. And so you have to have a hot day, a reasonably hot day, and then followed by a cooler day to get an inversion in the first place. If it's just sort of uniform cold, you don't never get it. So when we're spraying in April and early May and whatever, I don't think there's much chance.
But I'm thinking like even spraying right now, or like this week, next week, if you have.
No.
No.
No. It has to be dead calm.
In the middle of June, so because you might be, you know, it might be, you know, 25, 27. We could be in the high 20s, and then we could be down less than 10 degrees overnight, and that would create an inversion.
Okay.
And that's what Tom Wolf talks about. You know, Tom Wolf is really one of our, you know, the #1 spray expert in all of Western Canada. He's very concerned about inversion. You know, so says that would be the biggest negative of Nightspraying, and I don't really disagree with that. All I'm saying is that I think at certain times of the year, that's not really effective. And when you're climbing like some of them, it's not really safe. You know, the whole temperature, some of the advantages we've been talking about, you know, maybe they're never really going to show up without this.
Yeah. Well, that's why. Yeah.
I think a lot of times there's not that much difference, but I guess, you know, what we thought is if I just open up the window,
They're getting big, you're getting old.
Canada's telling us now to spray at midnight.
Well, actually, I was spraying in the middle of the day.
And at 10 o'clock the next morning. So that isn't so
No, I'm going to have to skip lunch, and maybe that would help me a little bit. Cause I'm thinking, you know, from what we've seen on 2 trials here, again, I don't like to jump to conclusions. I'm going to double check everything, and I'd like to see this again, but it's such a shocking effect to me. Like to me, this is like a 20% difference in control, and if you've got, say, a field as ugly as this one, I would definitely avoid spraying it at 4 to 5 in the morning. You know, like that's enough of an effect. You know, even a 5% difference on weed control on a field like this could have, you know, big ramifications on your overall, you know, weed bank and potentially even yield. You know, like that crop competition now. So
Ken, it was between midnight and 1 in the morning on the night treatment?
The night treatment was midnight to 1.
Yeah.
The early was 4 to 5, and the day was 12 to 1 p.m. lunchtime.
Would there be any difference in the evening, say 8 or 9?
You want me to just spray every hour?
Yes.
That's what I suggested.
I don't think I'm going to get up and say in the morning, but what I will do is I will spray until 11 at night. I don't spray anything, just the I don't see myself getting up at 1 in the morning.
No, and we
call
were,
yourself
like,
a farmer.
By no means were we trying to prove that night spraying is better, or what we really want to do is just evaluate what the differences are, because guys are spraying at night. More and more guys are doing that. So when I looked at this information, immediately I said, as a skeptic, I said, we screwed up. We did something wrong here. But actually over Twitter, somebody sent me an article. I don't know if you guys caught that. It was there's a report here. I'd be happy to send you guys the link, but it's called Understanding Glyphosate to Increase Performance, and this is some information out of Purdue University. And they've actually, the results that they have collaborate very well with what we're seeing here, is that a reduced efficacy of glyphosate in the early morning and even in a little bit towards the night hours. So I was just going to pull up the chart here that they had. They did talk about Rob's comment, the dilution effect potentially, but they have a little chart here with the times, and efficacy is 100 here, and it's got a curve here. So they're saying early morning efficacy has dropped, and again after that 9 o'clock time they're saying that efficacy has dropped. They've also mentioned in here that certain weeds will have an effect because do you know what velvet leaf is? What is that? So velvet leaf is a broadleaf weed that's as tall as Helen. But anyways, what they said was that the velvet leaf during the day will sort of open its leaves out, but at night it'll close it up. So you've got an actual physical difference in being able to hit that weed. That's another, you know, it was another component that I didn't really think about when we were putting the trial together, so I'm not sure which weeds that might affect, but it's another thing to think about as well. So anyways, that's about all I had on the night spraying thing. I think we'll have another opportunity at a crop walk or at the field school to look at the in-crop component to see if we're seeing any similar results, or like you said, if it's warmer during later spray season. We're actually trying to do the first in-crop application today, and then we've got a second trial again in about 2 weeks, just again to get different weather environments into that application. I've also, on that side of things, we've got a trial up in the Peace River area and one in the Bonnyville area, so we've got an opportunity to collect a little bit more information on that. So. Any final questions from anyone?
Is Brian going to be able to do the fungicide? He's got disease winter right there. Has he got a crew that wants to wake up at 1 in the morning?
No, his crew isn't as dedicated as us.
Because that would be interesting to do a fungicide on that winter wheat of Brian.
Yeah.
Well, I think the next round of experiments, there's two aspects to fungicides we're going to incorporate. One could relate to what you're talking about, and the other one, and I just forgot what I was here.
That would be one of the things, maybe a fungicide.
Yeah, definitely fungicide timing. And the other one is going to be fungicide efficacy when mixed with herbicide, because there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Questions about which herbicide, fungicide,
Yes.
And then another thing is your grassy herbicides and your doggy herbicides. Is there not a very rare not mixing in all the herbicides, same as doggy herbicide, or is there actually a synergistic effect?
well, I don't know, Bob's probably got probably
So, generality, grass isn't broadly like the tank mixtures. Well, every unique combination is different. If it's on the label, then it means it's close to being alternative. But, you know,
And I think that one's called rounded now. Is that
a lot of broadleaf herbicides would produce grass. But it's probably only 5 or 10%. Overcome that by I have done a lot of work on that. If I were to go to half compare that by itself.
I've never seen a slingshot.
Yeah.
Only if it's through with it.
We have
So bad.
Insert it, but it didn't really kill us. Double the rate, round up.
The fungicide you wouldn't expect to see a difference with because they're doing two different things. You don't expect to see whether you've got herbicide or not.
I think you can because it's how those herbicides, how they interact even in the spray tank before they hit the leaf surface. They can cause something to start happening in the spray tank. And then one can maybe inhibit, if it's not inhibiting the uptake, the other it may be inhibiting the translocation.
Well,
You had a contact herbicide that's spraying the plant so quickly that the second product, whatever it was, to translocate within the plant. So there's all kinds of possibilities.
well, and you have to add ag surf to certain ones as well and things like that, hey, that you might not need in your herbicides. And
I think it's not specifically when I was
So it's not a slam dunk.
Any other questions from anybody? Okay, well, I'd just like to thank finally our sponsors, UFA, Alberta Canola Producers Commission, the Canola Council, and the Alberta Pulse Growers. And I'd like to actually give a special thanks to Brian Barris for taking the time to show us through the winter wheat trials. And thank you all for coming. And we do have another crop walk scheduled for next Thursday, June 7th. But then we're going to screw you up the week following. That's going to be the Wednesday, June 13th. But you can check out our website for more details. And thanks a lot for coming, everybody.